Oh, really? What?
Good evening, everyone. Right at the beginning of the meeting, I just need to make an announcement that we've received apologies from Councillor Shepherd as chair and also Councillor Walmsley as vice chair. So the panel needs to appoint a chair for tonight's meeting right at the beginning. If we've got any nominations. Councillor Brown.
Right, I propose Councillor Troman's here as he's substituting for the deputy.
I'll second Councillor Troman's as our nomination.
Any other nominations? No? Would you like to vote on that proposal? Councillor Troman's chair at the meeting. All those in favour? Would you like to come and
Right.
join us? And can I also announce that we are expecting officers and guest presenters. That's probably running a little bit late. Hello, Jenny. Would you like to come down?
Have a comfy seat. Right, I'd like to call the meeting properly to order then. I know we just jumped out of the agenda slightly, but I'd like to get back on track with item 1, evacuation procedure. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if there is one, please leave by the fire exit. There's only one. Don't be tempted to use the window, we're a bit too far up for that. If you need any help leaving the building, please raise your hand, make yourself known, and you will be assisted. We meet outside the bank opposite in the event of an evacuation. Apologies, there's been 2. I'm substituting for Councillor Walmsley. I understand there's apologies from Councillor T. Shepherd, who's been substituted by Councillor Tandy, is that correct? And also apologies from Councillor Brindley Edwards, who's been substituted by Councillor Smith. Thank you for attending.
Could I also register apologies from Councillor
Hancock's here. Okay, minutes of the last meeting. Obviously I'm not normally on this panel, so I can't really move anything from the chair. Somebody want to propose them as being
I'll move that, Chair.
true and accurate? Is there a seconder? Thank you. So that's Councillor Bowman and Councillor Woodkin. Declarations of interest or party whip, anything that's not already in the preamble of the reports?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My register of interest has completely changed. Democratic Services do have a copy of my new register, but they have yet to upload it onto the council's website. So I would just refer members to my new register that will be found online shortly.
Wendy, can we get that done before any more meetings?
Yes, we can. Unfortunately, this agenda went out before
A little while
we
ago,
received
did it?
that. Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Any other declarations, Councillor Bowman?
Chairman, there are 3 elements that don't really apply to myself. Representatives on the following outside bodies. Diversity Champion is not an outside body. Bulkington Village Centre project is a repeat of the Bulkington Village Centre reference at the top. And Warwickshire Joint Overview and Scrutiny, I understand that falls to the chair of this committee to attend that committee. I acted as a substitute yesterday on that very place. So if you take out those three, that leaves Nuneaton and Bedworth Older People's Forum, which I am a representative on. Okay, it's a bit complicated, but
Thank you.
when does anyone here that would...
Is the council required to make a new declaration then or can you make those amendments for?
I can make those amendments, yeah.
Yeah,
They're
okay.
updated from the outside bodies list from the council meeting.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Llewellyn Nash?
I'm not a parish councillor for St Giles at the moment, and I'm a treasurer of the Exor Multicultural Group, not vice president.
We get all that one. Great. Councillor Bradford.
My register's been updated, but the interest occurred on page 10 are the current ones, the ones that are displayed on page 11. Page 12 are no longer, some of them are no longer relevant. So page 10 are the current and accurate ones.
Oh, that's still correct for you, what's on page 10?
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, public consultation. Well, we'll keep the public hanging around. If there's any member of the public who wishes to speak on any of the items, have we got a speaker? We have Mrs. Undercore on item 6. So, Tammy?
After the presentation. After the presentation.
Very happy for you to speak after the presentation, yeah?
Yeah, particularly as it's a oral one, I had no paperwork, so
Right.
I can't make any comments. You don't know.
Oh, right, okay. So thank you for inviting me today to the meeting. Can you hear me?
Not too well.
Not very easily.
Right. Shall I stand? I can project if I stand.
That's very good.
Is that better? So thank you for inviting me for the meeting today. The brief that I had was to do an update in relation to primary care services for the area. So obviously that's quite broad in terms of what might be of interest to you. So I'm hoping that this is partly a conversation and partly a presentation, and I'm happy to take questions and queries as I go through, and then potentially I can mould what I'm talking about to the interests or your particular concerns or interests as I go through, if that's okay. And my presentation will then be a framework for that conversation rather than just talking at you. Is that okay? So that's and can I just check how much time have I got?
How long are you planning on taking?
I can talk as little or as succinct as you would rather.
If you want to run it through it in 10 minutes, and then if there's more stuff, then we can ask questions.
Okay, that's
Because I think it's normally questions that councillors have. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Okay, so first and foremost, I do know some of the people around the room. So, but I'm Jenny Northcote. For those of you who don't know me, and I'm the Chief Strategy and Primary Care Officer, and I work for Warwickshire North CCG. My well, sorry, can I just keep that a second? Because we're probably referring to it. Thank you. And I believe that today I'm updating you in relation to some of the work that we're doing around primary care, our future primary care strategy, some of the challenges that we are facing and what we're doing around those. So, first of all, in terms of new developments in primary care, so if I could just go to the next slide. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about and let you know is what the current sort of position of primary care is, and then I'll go on to telling you some of the latest developments. So the good news is that, generally speaking, the GP patient survey generally shows that there is a strong satisfaction base for primary care. And often we hear about things that aren't going well in primary care and people concerned about being able to get appointments, and certainly that is an issue and a theme. However, it is important to be really clear that we are in line with the national benchmarks in terms of satisfaction rates for GP practices locally. In terms of some of the areas though that we do know that we need to work on, it is that satisfaction with phone access. And we've got some work that we're doing in our digital programme, which I can talk to later on in the presentation, which is specifically aiming to address some of those concerns and considerations. Also, one of the things that we know we need to focus on is online services. Now, not everybody wants an online service, and that's not what everybody wants, but the national requirement is to have a digital offer for those that want to use it. And one of the things is that the take-up of digital services that are available in our primary care provision locally is actually quite considerably below average. So there's something about the take-up and the way we actually promote that and make people aware that that is an option for them should they wish to want to use it. But absolutely, please don't hear the message that if you don't want, if online is not for you, that is not the only method of interacting with primary care going forward. In terms of above average on our patient satisfactions, you can see some of those things. Choice of appointment, recognising mental health and long-term conditions. So I think that speaks to the quality of the care that is given for some of our most vulnerable patients when people do get access to primary care. The other thing to say is, which is not on here, but actually all our GP practices are rated. We have no requires improvements practices in our local area. So we have all practices from a CQC registration that are seen to be giving a good standard of quality care. So, it's frozen. Okay, so just carry on regardless. Okay. So, what's new in primary care then? So one of the things that if you've been following the news in primary care and a lot of discussions around the long-term plan, which is the sort of national focus for health at the moment in terms of the 10-year and 5-year aspirations for not only for primary care but for the health service, there is this thing called primary care networks. Now primary care networks are basically driving practices to work more collaboratively together and to also try and standardise some of the care offer that is available to patients in primary care, but also to build the resilience of primary care working together. And often we use the term primary care and actually we're talking about general practice, whereas within the primary care networks there is an aspiration of joining up other primary care providers, whether that might be pharmacy, for example, so that we can actually truly have a more integrated primary care offer. The other thing that primary care networks are charged with doing is to work much more closely with community services provision, providing services, whether that's through district nursing, for example, and to integrate the way that that care is provided and to target that care more effectively and to ensure that we're working with our most vulnerable patients in an integrated way with primary care and out-of-hospital teams and community settings working together. So the diagram that you've got on there is in a sense the sort of vision of what primary care networks will be in the future. There'll be collections of general practices working together, but with a broader range of workforce and a broader range of integrated community service providers offering more services locally wrapped around general practice, closer to home, and also having a more consistent offer to registered patient lists. So primary care networks in this part of the patch is that we, I think on one of the beginning slides, there's 18 primary care networks across the whole of Coventry and Warwickshire STP footprint, but we have 4 primary care networks specifically in the Warwickshire North CCG area, of which you have 3 that are specifically within the Nuneaton and Bedworth areas, 4 being rural North Warwickshire. So the information that you've got there is a little map in terms of the configuration of the networks and how they've come together, and a table in terms of the practices and their list size in terms of how they've come together. Now, primary care networks have been something that, as I say, is part of a national agenda to bring practices together, and there is some funding that's attributed to primary care networks. But we were already working on this concept of bringing practices together. We'd previously called it clusters, but it's now been renamed as networks. And so we were in a good position to respond to this national agenda. There was a timeline for setting up these primary care networks, and they all went live nationally on the 1st of July. And the primary care networks had to demonstrate that they put certain things in place in order to register as a primary care network. And what does it mean, being a primary care network? It basically means there's a commitment of those practices working together to deliver a specific specification that's over and above their general medical contract that they hold as individual contractors. So it's about another layer of delivery that they will be required to support in terms of providing services for their registered population. The sorts of things that primary care networks will be required to deliver in order to be eligible for the additional funding that's been routed through primary care networks includes a number of things. In the first year, so in this year that we are in now, the requirement is that they will have to provide additional consultations for that registered population. And there's a requirement that they have to provide an additional 30 minutes per 1,000 population. So as you can see, and for those of you that are really good in maths, you could probably work out from your patient population times 30 minutes for each 1,000 registrations. So that is additional requirements for general medical service provision, a consultation. So those consultations don't all have to be face-to-face. They can be digital, they can be triage, they can be a range of things, and they don't all have to be delivered by a GP, but there is a requirement for them to be clinical and driven in terms of the service need in the area. The times that they can be offered at have to be over and above core hours within general practice being between 8 and 6:30. So that could mean on a Saturday, a Sunday, early morning or evening, and the primary care networks will decide what's right for their patient cohort in terms of what's the best use to give additionality over and above what they're already providing. That's what they've got to deliver today as of the 1st of July. They don't necessarily have to have every single practice delivering that additional requirement. They can nominate one practice or two practices in the area to provide that cover, but the cover has to be available to 100% of the patient population that they cover. So it's an accessible offer to everybody that's registered within practice in that area. Going forward into the future, the contract that primary care networks will need to deliver is actually a 5-year investment contract, and it includes the requirement in future years to deliver additional specifications and additional requirements. And on this page where it says new requirements, you've got those listed there. The first 5 network specifications are those listed, and then following on from those, there will be further 2 areas which are around cardiovascular disease and tackling health inequalities. So what this means is that primary care networks will have to demonstrate that they are delivering certain requirements for their patient population in terms of medicine reviews, for example. So that might be around working with people that we use the term polypharmacy. That's when people are on multiple medications, and often they're the individuals that find it most difficult to manage their medication because of the interdependencies with their medication, and often can be the most frail because of the range of medicines they're on. They will have to provide an enhanced offer to care homes. Now that's important because in previous times it's been nursing homes only, but it's care homes now, so that's expanding the breadth in terms of the support that's offered to our ageing population that are living in those particular settings, and that's really been driven by some of the key demand areas on our hospitals being from those sorts of settings. There's a term anticipatory care there. Again, I'm so sorry, but these are the national terms, so I'm giving you the national terms. Anticipatory care basically means, are we really working with people to understand the needs that they have early enough and anticipating the care that they might need to ensure that their condition does not escalate or doesn't worsen. So that's about using more technical language, risk stratification in terms of identifying the cohorts of patients that we really could affect some better outcomes if we worked with them earlier in their disease journey or with their care needs. The other areas that are there are early diagnosis of cancer, and that's really recognising that actually we need to be screening earlier, and we need to be ensuring that we provide early interventions for cancer. Personalised care, that's very much about recognising that when we're working with people with a range of conditions, that the care they need doesn't always fit into a standard approach, a standard box, and being able to be more flexible with the way care is delivered, and so they'll be required to demonstrate that. And then some of the areas that we've talked about there, cardiovascular disease and the health inequalities agenda, is something that primary care networks, being local, will be expected to respond to. The detail of some of these specifications and what they'll have to actually do is yet to be fully determined, but those are the areas that they'll be focusing on. And when you look at some of the needs in our area and the JSNA, that aligns quite nicely with some of the concerns and considerations we would want to address locally anyway. Ultimately, primary care networks are expected in their contribution in working with patients differently in collaboration with out-of-hospital and broader partners, are expected to be able to then support us as a system of health and social care to deliver impacts in relation to the things that are bullet pointed there. So obviously avoidable A&E admissions, that talks to the extended hours, because some people are going to A&E, they can't get a GP appointment, so the additional consultation should help for that, for example. So then moving on, skip over this time, I've already indicated that the primary care networks are now live, and the specifications that I've just talked about come on board from April 2020. So, one of the other considerations and challenges in relation to primary care is the place from which primary care services is delivered. And we've been doing a lot of work locally in terms of understanding our estate. Is it fit for purpose, and is it going to enable us to deliver some of the new services? Primary care networks will also have funding available for investment in workforce and new roles, 5 new roles. Those roles will include social prescribing, they will include clinical pharmacists, they will include physiotherapists going forward, and AMPs, and also paramedics. They come on stream over the next 5 years. So our estate needs to be able to accommodate these different ways of working, more joined up services, and also having a broader workforce. So we've been doing an awful lot of work in relation to understanding our estates. We also know that we've got some key challenges in terms of population growth and housing developments. We've got a number of projects that we are currently working through, and some of those are listed there in terms of new developments and propositions for Weddington and Hartshill in terms of this area. But also looking at the opportunity to work with our providers in terms of some of the estate that they own, and whether we can actually integrate our service provision, clinics, etc., to provide a better service. We have looked at our estates both in terms of what the capacity requirements are for delivering for today, but also what the future growth requirements would be in terms of size and space. We've also looked at it in terms of, if we extend the hours of operation, what does that mean in terms of size and space? And we also looked at, if we were able to transfer some of the activity that is face-to-face and goes to a place, what it would look like if some of that became digital. Because what we don't want to do is invest in a lot of big premises that then end up not being utilised, because we've actually changed the model of care and the way we deliver primary care going forward. So we've looked at all of that. The other thing that we've looked at is the patient cohorts and patient population, and what some of their needs are, and what some of the conditions, issues that they are dealing with. And we're looking to try and reframe some of the out-of-hospital services and some of the outpatient clinics that are currently delivered to be more aligned with the needs of that local population, so they actually match service provision a bit better. So we're looking to do that as well. In terms of digital, there is a big agenda with digital. I've already sort of mentioned it really, and this slide probably isn't doing justice to it, but there is this concept of digital first primary care for those that want it. In essence, the digital offer is looking at several things. It's looking at, can I book appointments and access information through a digital access and have that opportunity? Can I have repeat prescriptions, etc.? And some of these things are already in place, but we'll be building on. It's also about using apps in terms of signposting information, reminders, sort of self-care advice, etc. That's coming on stream. And the NHS app does go live in this area very soon, so we will be one of the first to take that forward. Also, in relation to working with our out-of-hospital teams, we're looking at some new technologies in terms of wearable devices, so people can actually monitor their own condition, and some of the readings can go forward into their care plan, so that they don't necessarily have to have lots of unnecessary outpatient appointments or follow-ups if they're actually well and doing well with their condition. And we're also working really, really hard to try and make sure that some of the systems that we use in hospital, in community and in general practice talk to each other, so that our staff can actually see the information around the patient and really manage the care of the patient more effectively in real time. Also, there is a requirement by March 31st, 2020 that we have the capability to offer online consultations for those that want it. And an online consultation doesn't necessarily have to be Skype. It can be a conversation through different methods, through messaging, etc. But it is a conversation, it is a clinical intervention, it's not just receiving a piece of information through a text. It's more than that, it's a dialogue. So in terms of workforce then, I've already touched on some of the workforce things that in terms of some of the new roles coming into general practice. So every network will have an entitlement of funding. In the first year, it's across the board, a clinical pharmacist and a social prescriber. The social prescriber will be funded 100% from the allocation that they will receive. Clinical pharmacists will be funded at 70%, and the practices themselves from their other income streams will have to top that up. Locally in Warwickshire North, we have got a really good concept about how we're going to do that, and we are working very closely with our community provider to look at how we actually recruit that clinical pharmacy workforce and provide that offer to primary care networks. But in addition to that, we've got a shed load of initiatives that we're doing around workforce, because workforce is clearly very important. The focus to date nationally has been around GP recruiters and retention, and that's a real challenge for us locally, as it is nationally. We are making some inroads into that, and we have seen new GPs join our practices recently. Some practices have more success in attracting new talent and younger GPs into the area. But we have got a range of campaigns. We've got a campaign called Care for Your Career, which we're launching, which is about saying why come to this area, what we've got to offer for you, what's great about working here and what's great about working in general practice here. And that's been done with GPs and nurses locally. We've also put into place a GP and nurse mentor programme, because what we were finding was that actually some of the stresses and strains and resilience issues were about how people were supported, and people were exiting and retiring early because of some of that pastoral needs. So we've put some of that work programme in. We've also identified that we were losing people, particularly in their first 5 years. So the first 5-year GP mentor programme is specifically targeting supporting people in that new 5-year period of their career to help retain them. And then we've got a retention and retainer programme, which is about supporting people to come back into general practice if they've maybe had a period of time out, maybe for children or for other reasons, and also delaying people thinking about early retirement by offering them different roles or different opportunities to retain them in the local community. We've also been working really, really closely with the universities and Health Education England about what we've found is that if you actually get somebody that's on a training programme to do a training placement at a local practice, they are much, much more likely to stay. So we're looking at how we incentivise practices to take on trainees and to do a work experience programme with the local universities to try and provide that opportunity. We've got a training hub which is offering a range of in-service training, post-validation and post becoming a GP to keep their training skills up and looking at portfolio careers. So a range of different things, but we're not just doing it with GPs, we're also really investing in our nurses. So we've invested in prescribing courses for our more senior nurses, and we've now massively increased our capacity of nurses that have got prescribing skill sets. And we've also been doing it at the other end, where we've invested in our HCAs, our healthcare assistants, in terms of encouraging people to come into general practice and be trained as healthcare assistants and have a route through their career, as well as practice manager training as well. So that's a whistle-stop tour in terms of the things that we're doing. We have captured all of some of that that we're doing in at the moment, and I'm hoping that some of you will have received this through other routes. But we are currently engaging on our primary care strategy.
It's a draft, isn't it?
So what this document is, it's an engagement document. So it's saying these are what we think are some of our ambitions and our priorities and the things that we need to be focusing on in line with the long-term plan and the national agenda. And we're asking for comments back from people to say, is this in the right direction? Have we missed anything? Is there anything else? Is there anything you're concerned about?
And Jenny, the closing date for those submissions is?
Okay, so we said that we would focus on the engagement throughout June and July. So really we've got end of July. What we have to do to meet the national time frame is that we will have to provide a submission to NHS England of our draft actual strategy, and we have actually done that.
Right.
But the intention is, and we've explicitly told NHS England that even though we've submitted this as it is to meet their timescales, that we are working to these timescales locally because we really feel it's important to engage and get feedback. And so we will not be publishing our final strategy until around September, October to take account of the engagement.
Great, thank you very much, Jenny. That's very comprehensive. You've whistled through that. So lots of information there. I think the primary care strategy, obviously, as you're saying, it's a draft. It's for people to study and provide submissions and feedback to you at their leisure, but certainly before the end of July if they're going to submit everything. In the meantime, I don't know if Mrs. Chronicle wants to speak now.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny. That was very useful, very clear. Just a few things really to pick up on from what you've said. I mean, some of it is actually rejigging things that were there before. Unfortunately, then the government cut a lot of things because if I took a career break, I could be on the what was called the KIT scheme, keeping in touch, where my registration was paid, and then they abandoned that. So, you know, I don't know what the medical registration fee is, but it's currently about £900 a year to remain on the dental register, and that if you're not working because you're taking time out for family reasons or whatever, that's an awful lot. So that maybe is something, I don't know whether that's covered in that. But
yeah, and sorry, one thing I didn't mention, because there's always like what to leave in and what to leave out, but one of the big things that professionals in working in primary care have really welcomed is a national indemnity scheme, because that's basically their insurance in terms of for practice. And as it's just been described, it was getting very, very expensive, and particularly if people working in out of hospital settings or in non-traditional settings, it was getting hyped. But now there's a national scheme for that, so that has actually helped in terms of some of the retention, particularly at the beginning and the end of their career.
Yeah. As the speaker only gets a certain time to speak, if you can answer any questions she raises at the end. No, that's fine. We pause the clock. So,
one thing that really concerns me is actually the communication of changes to the general public, because people are very resistant to change, and I can see that there's a logical way of progressing things, and with a limited workforce. But people will say, oh, well, they're sending me somewhere else, and then whereas before they might have been sent to the hospital, they'll be sent to another practice for certain things. They equate that with cuts and things. So how are you going to communicate that this is actually positive, good change, and not just another backdoor cuts? Because I know people are very. How closely are the primary care networks aligned to what were the clusters before, and sort of how much communication? Because I know Hinckley and Bosworth and Leicestershire have had networks for rather longer, but I don't know whether the clusters we had were actually really the same thing. And joined up systems, yes. I've encountered so many occasions where there's just not a linkage between different things, between hospital things. I actually raised it at the hospital board meeting a few months back and things, when I'd had an incident and things I'd had done by the paramedics in the ambulance were then repeated with different cost, greater cost when I got to the hospital, and they said, oh, but the ECG that they use in the ambulance isn't the same thing, so we have to use different pads. And it just seemed like a total waste of money. As I said, once I'd established that I wasn't dying, there was no need for a lot of the duplication. So actually making sure that everyone can talk to each other and everyone's using the same systems would be such a positive move, and I think people have known about that for an awful long while, but it doesn't always seem to happen. I think that's probably all I need to mention. Thank you.
So,
Are we allowed to question the speaker?
by all means, but I think you did raise one point at least that needs coming back on. Jenny, if you can come back on that with the answer, and then, because that may inform
that's
what we
absolutely
want.
fine. So changes to the public and how we're going to communicate. I mean, obviously, part of that is the engagement documents. So we will be doing that. The other thing that we're doing is we want to work through the primary care networks, because in that we will be requiring, and this will be a local thing, requiring the primary care networks to actually outline how they are going to communicate the changes with their registered population. And we are also very keen to work with local, I'm probably going to get this wrong with the terminology, but the sort of local development workers in the area. So one of the things we wanted to try and do is build on the JSNA work and stakeholder work that's been done there, and the forums that are established there, and to try and kind of create some ongoing conversations with people that came forward to that, because we see the networks as an opportunity for more local conversations, ongoing conversations, and also to try and get beyond PPGs have a place and are very important, but actually what we're trying to achieve is a more integrated thing about looking at all the needs. So trying to reach into some of those other community forums. So that's the answer to that one. The other one was around clusters. Each area is different. So in some areas, clusters had formed around friendships and around who people liked to work with. And we had a little bit of that in our area. The requirements under the national, to get the funding, there were certain requirements, and one of those was it had to make sense geographically to the other service providers that support general practice delivery, so community providers, and also to patients. So if you look at our geography, we've got rural north, and then we've got two in Nuneaton because of the size of, and then we've got Bedworth. So we've tried to sort of take that. We actually didn't require particular practices to come together. We commissioned an engagement piece of work from within general practice to come up with a suggestion, and then we worked with them on tweaking that. So it was very much ground up and in collaboration. So that's how we did that. Joined up systems. I think at one stage we were looking at putting in a system where we sort of basically said everybody's going to use the one system. Clearly that was going to be extortionate and was never actually in reality going to happen. So the focus has now been on about how we're going to get systems to work and talk to each other. It will take time.
Councillor Beaumont, you had some points to raise with the speaker.
Well, it's the warmth of your approach to this document that I've really ask you about. Have you been aware of all the developments that have been going on over the last months to
No.
try and get here?
No.
I've seen some of it, and I must say I join you in welcoming this. And the groupings have changed, I think, almost over the last few weeks, as far as I can see. This wasn't a settled pattern that I saw a month ago, and I think this is an improvement. It includes some things which I would really welcome. And in particular, Whitestone surgery is associated with Bulgington at last, which I think is wonderful. Thank you very much, whoever achieved that, because I did get some notion of underlying resistance to the groupings that maybe are in here now. But yeah, and the clinical lead, if I can just turn Chairman to Jenny, the clinical lead is based on these three areas now.
Yes, sorry, I've got another document I can show you this right if you want to. There are 4 primary care networks in the whole of our area that's CCG. I focused on the information because of the audience tonight in terms of the 3 that you've got. But yes, so there is, for each network to be registered, they have to have something that's called a clinical director. And the clinical director has to be a practicing clinician. It doesn't have to be a GP, but in our cases it is. A practicing clinician, and they have to be a practicing clinician within that network. So it's about the ownership and feeling part of that delivery in that area. And there is a stream of funding that supports them to undertake that role. There is a job description or a role description, but the networks have gone through a selection or an appointment process to identify the person that they want to lead and they feel is credible for their network. I've got the names of the individuals here. So you've got Dr.
We can get that circulated by Wendy, so that'd be great.
Sorry, can I just also add, locally we've also additionally funded, and this isn't national aid, we've also additionally funded coordinated capacity from a sort of practice manager or business manager, because we believed that actually setting up these networks was going to require quite a lot of administrative support and setting up the sort of way they were going to work, the governance, etc. And so we've chosen to additionally fund those as that as well.
And the patient participation group for this, will there be one for this area?
So as I said before, at the moment the individual GP still hold their contracts, and the GPs still are required to demonstrate that they've got some mechanism for patient feedback or a PPG type forum. It doesn't have to meet as a group. So they have to do that anyway as a practice to be contractually compliant. But one of the things that we are requiring our networks to do is to work through and identify how they intend to get patient voice and patient feedback on the specifications and the requirements that they deliver as a network. It will take them some time to set that up because they've only gone live the 1st of July, but it's one of the things that we'd expect them to do going forward.
Thanks, that's all good. Thank you.
So does any member have any questions for our speaker? Not for our speaker. Any member got questions for Jenny?
I was just questions
Councillor
in
Talbot.
general, Chair.
Yeah.
So, just a couple of points. When we talked about new requirements in the DES, and you talk about the specifications and then following that with the delivery impact, it talks about the PCNs are expected to support a system impact on. I fully understand what that is saying, but it isn't the PCN who will decide which are the avoidable A&E admissions. It isn't the PCN who will decide if there are avoidable emergency admissions. And in the sense of it's actually the people on the ground who will be responsible for that, not the PCN. Another point that I wanted to make was further back, which talked about the digital processes, which was the second one along, use the NHS app to book GP appointments. there are many, many people out there, especially the elderly, who don't have a mobile phone, never mind being able to use an app on a mobile phone to do that. And you know, it's well known that it's a lot of the elderly patients who are having the problems in getting the appointments because they don't have the facilities such as the internet and stuff like that to do so. And the third point, Chair, was the consultation. Who is taking part in the consultation?
Shall I run through each of those?
Yep, please.
Okay, so the PCN and the impact. So probably what I didn't explain is that you are right, on the ground, people operationally will make decisions clinically about whether somebody should be admitted or avoided. But what we mean by the primary care networks will have an impact on that is, and I'll give you an example. So we know from some of the data that at the moment there are situations where people aren't getting regular medicine reviews, or the interaction between their medication isn't necessarily being managed effectively as it might be. And sometimes that leads to things like falls, or it leads to escalation in conditions where they then need to go into hospital. So at that point, clinically, that's what takes precedent, and they absolutely would be admitted if that was needed to do. But what we've done locally is we've commissioned some additional services, so a rapid response service from our out of hospital programme, where they will go to see people within a 2-hour window. And what we're finding is that working with primary care networks, identifying some of those patients that need that sort of rapid response, we have actually been able to make an impact on some people not necessarily needing to go to turn up at A&E. Also, the extended access programme that I've spoken about. So one of the things that we know from A&E is 30 to 40%, it's as high as that, 30 to 40% of any activity in an A&E department at the front door is potentially manageable in primary care. But people don't go to primary care sometimes because they don't think they can get an appointment.
Sorry, can I ask, when you say they don't go to primary care, you know, what do you mean?
So example is that so I'll give you a very specific example. A parent that might be concerned about a wheezy child that's perhaps got an asthma condition, if they can't get an appointment for that day, they may feel, okay, I'm concerned enough about my child that I'm now going to take my child to A&E. That's a perfectly reasonable parental response to a situation, and they will end up at A&E. They may then be admitted for observations, etc., etc. Sometimes the consultant's not available, so they may even be admitted for a short overnight stay. And yet, potentially, if that individual did have an appointment with their GP that knows that child, knows that condition, they could probably reassure the parent, make sure the medication is being administered correctly, and potentially that would not need to happen. It's those sorts of things where the primary care networks, because they've got additional capacity and additional appointments, can hopefully make some change. That's what we're trying to achieve, and that's what they'll be monitored on ultimately, because there is a lot of money going into this development, and they will need to demonstrate that we've done. So that's the primary care. Digital, I did say, and I was very clear, that the digital offer is for those people that want it. We are not going to require people to have to use an app or to have to only use digital as a method for getting through to general practice. But actually, if we can provide that offer to our young people and people that do want to use that, then we can take some of that traffic away from the telephone system, and it can be then more available to those people that want that. So it's about providing the right offer to how people want to access care. As a working parent, I have really valued the experience of being able to have a telephone consultation whilst I'm at work and not have to take half a day off work, and I've been able to book that digitally. Now that for me is a fantastic option. That means I didn't need to keep ringing, I didn't need to take up a face-to-face appointment that somebody else might have benefited from, and I didn't have to have half a day off work. That's the sort of impact we want to try and achieve. I think that's the
Consultation.
Oh, consultation, right, thank you. Yes, so the way we're doing so first of all, this is an engagement exercise, it's not a formal consultation. I know that sounds like splitting hairs, but that is important. So what we've been doing is we've taken this document through to various different groups, such as this, and added to various different organisations. We've already presented it to the PPG groups. We've taken it, it's gone out to through the voluntary sector routes. It's gone out to all our GP practices. It's gone out to all our nurse practitioners. It's gone out to all our providers. It's gone out to anybody we contract with. It's on our website, and I'm happy to make it available to other people if you think we've missed anything. Where we've worked with specific vulnerable groups such as homeless and asylum seeker groups, we've also tried to take it through those routes verbally as well.
Councillor Longdon.
Thank you. Hi Jenny, nice to see you. I think on the North Health and Wellbeing group, I actually said I was happy with something and Andy had to go and lie down in the so I'm reverting back to type.
Okay. Oh, I thought you were going to give me something
No,
positive then. Oh,
no.
Damn.
This is absolute nonsense. I'm sorry, but it is. The 85%, you're making it sound like 85% of all the residents in this borough are happy. I can tell you now that they're not. And if possible, which I doubt very much if it is possible, but could we see the breakdown per surgery?
Yes, absolutely. We've got that. So it's
I haven't
not.
finished yet.
Sorry, go on.
Might need some more yet. With regards to the digital offer and everything else that's going on, Arbery did have that thing, so I joined up on that, only to find that every time I tried to use it, it's saying no appointments today, no appointments this week, no appointments next week, no appointments this month. Absolute utter waste of time that got me nowhere. Couldn't even get into my records I'm supposed to. Nobody there was there to check. You try and get through on the telephone, they tell you between 8 and 9 in the morning, you can't get through. It's permanently engaged. Waste of space in that respect. There's a queue every morning that goes from the front door all the way around the building for people desperate to get in to see a doctor. So if you went to Arbery, I would say you're getting zero satisfaction rate with that, because there's only be people who are frightened of being struck off or whatever that would say it was a good service, because it isn't nowhere near a good service. Now I don't know if that much that is repeated through the entire numbers, and that's why I'd be interested to see what it's like per practice, because I don't believe that you get anywhere near 85% in the Stockingford area. With regards to something else, this report doesn't mention 111. 111, another fantastic idea, I suppose. 111 goes through, you go through all the list. Sometimes you can speak to people, sometimes you do it online. Then it comes back and says, call an ambulance or see a GP within 2 hours. Well, as I've just explained, you'd be lucky to get see a GP within 2 months, let alone 2 hours. So where do you go? You go to A&E. It defeats the whole thing. 111 is not working, and I know people who work in the business, and they'll tell you that 111 is a waste of time, because most of the time they're saying call an ambulance. And even if you get triaged, the people doing the triaging are not medical clinicians. They're just ordinary people who've got a list of questions and a tick box. So then it has to be referred, and you might get a call back, if you're lucky, by a nurse. You might. You have to be very lucky. So it's a waste of space, waste of time, and waste of money. It's not even mentioned in here about 111, and yet it's all being paid for by CCG. So I think that was about it.
Okay.
End of whinges.
That's absolutely fine. So this document does mention 111 in terms of the engagement, but so So let me run through things. The 85%, that is of those people that responded to the survey, and that's the national survey that is run, so it's nothing to do with us locally, it's a national survey. But what I will say is when we've also done our local surveys as well on specific things, there is genuinely a relatively high satisfaction rate with practices, notwithstanding that you've just obviously described a particular issue with a particular practice. Contractually, practices, there is a contract and practices do have to deliver against that contract. And so if there are patient concerns or patient complaints, obviously we would address those through a contractual route. Going forward, and I haven't put all of this in the presentation because I could go on infinitum. There is a new development which is something called the workforce tool, which has been put in nationally, and basically what that will do going forward in the future is it will monitor the number of appointments that each practice makes available to its registered population. We have never before had that information, and there's been nothing in the contracts previously that's required a practice of a certain size to have to provide a minimum number of patient appointments. The government and the policy hasn't gone quite that far yet, but what it is doing is saying that we will use a mandated national tool that you will have to demonstrate how many appointments that you've provided, and you will be benchmarked against your peers, and that will be coming soon. So these sorts of issues will be managed. Arbery, if you're talking about just recently, they've just this is not an excuse, it's a fact. They've just had a clinical system change. They've moved from one clinical system to another, and it has been an absolute nightmare for them in terms of their process. And we've had engineers and IT people on site for the last 6 weeks trying to resolve it. But that's a very specific issue.
But the patient side has not yet been addressed. You can't get into it now.
Yeah. And then the 111, in terms of the point made about clinical time, in the recent refresh of the contract with 111, we required them to increase the number of clinical staff doing the triage as part of the requirements based on feedback that we had done, and 111 can now book directly into practices. The point that you made in terms of whether people can get appointments through the online system, obviously that needs to be raised as a very specific complaint because that should not be happening, and contractually that's something we could pick up, but that's obviously a particular issue with a particular practice, is not part of the strategy.
I thought it was general, that's why I raised it, because I thought most of them, but obviously most of them are not going through the same things that we are.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, bizarrely, we have conversations with our practice managers, and there is actually availability of appointments. Actually, at most practices, the issue is potentially whether that aligns with when people want to have them, because and this is not a blame the public, because at the end of the day we all want choice. I described how I wanted choice with being going to work. But actually, what sometimes is recorded when people say they haven't been able to have an appointment for 1 week, 2 weeks. When you actually delve down into it, they have been offered maybe 2 or 3 appointments, but it wasn't actually necessarily as convenient. That's not always the case, and there are some practices that run systems where you phone up at 8 o'clock, etc., and we know that is a practice that patients don't like, and we are working with practices on that. So what I would say to you is, like any service, there will be experience that's poor and it needs to be addressed. There will be practices that are not as good as others and don't have as efficient system as others, and they need to be addressed, and we have a contractual mechanism to do so. But what I am saying is that there is enough capacity commissioned in terms of appointment availability, and that has been increased significantly through this investment.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, just on that, we've had hubs, we've had clusters, now we've got networks. One day we'll decide on a name, but that doesn't change anything to the experience of people on the ground. So that's what you're aiming for, but that's not what people on the ground are
We
getting.
are absolutely aiming to change the experience, and I would be very happy to come back in 12 months' time to see whether we've actually affected any change with these investments, because ultimately, you know, 30 minutes additional appointments per 1,000 population, that's quite a significant additional element of capacity. 5 new roles in each area.
We are going to talk about our work programme, so maybe we do put that in for a year's time, depending on what other members think. Any other member want to come back? Councillor Dolby?
Yeah, I'm actually quite happy at our doctor's surgery. I mean, you've had your experience at Harbury. We're at Old Mill, and we don't get anything like that. If I need an appointment, generally, they'll get you in the same day. Same with the kids. So I've never really struggled to get appointments. I think if you want a routine appointment, you do maybe have to wait a week, because that's a routine appointment. But if you ring up and say I need to see somebody, generally I'm fine that they will get me in. The digital, really good, because I'm in the same boat as you. I'm here, there and everywhere. I don't necessarily need to spend time in a doctor's surgery taking up time that somebody else can be using. But I do need to speak to somebody. That would be brilliant. So the sooner that can be rolled out for me, and people like me as well, I suppose, the better. You've just touched on what I was going to actually ask you. It was the review times. How are you measuring the outcomes, and when are you going to start producing the details of those outcomes?
Yeah, so the primary care network specifically is as I say, national programme. It's a 5-year investment programme, and some of the things that I've talked about come on stream throughout the 5 years. So in the first instance, the extended access is the bit that they're focusing on for this year. So we'll be monitoring that from now in terms of, and first of all, we're monitoring, are they actually delivering the additional appointments? How are they delivering those? And we will then look at things like A&E data and satisfaction rates, etc., to see whether it's had an impact. There is going to be a national dashboard that will be provided to us as CCGs to monitor practices on that relate to the primary care network requirements. We haven't seen that yet. It's still in development. But in advance of that, we're already doing work ourselves to do some benchmarks. So we know, for example, the specifications, some of the things that are going to be monitored. So we're already giving our practice networks data packs to say, this is your current information, and we're also highlighting where there's significant variation. So within a network, if somebody's doing really well on a flu take-up or early diagnosis of cancer, we're saying, look at this variation, you know, can you learn from each other? Is it something you can do? And in general practice, peer review and peer intervention actually it can be very powerful.
Okay, any other member at all? I have a couple of very quick points for you. First of all, the new GP in Weddington, we say new, it should have been done ages ago. There's that bit of land in there. What's the date for that opening?
Oh my goodness me. So I can't give you a date.
Ballpark?
I really can't give you a date. The reason being is there's a lot of complexities that we have to jump through. We are committed to.
This has been years.
I absolutely understand that. I understand the frustrations. There's a lot of things. There's planning. There's all sorts of different things. We are looking to get a business case approved as soon as possible. We are committed to working towards a provision on that side.
I think after the years that site's been left there empty and all the houses have been built and occupied around it, I think at this point saying planning it can't be in planning anymore. There needs to be a business case put forward, and that needs to happen ASAP.
There is a business case in development. There's some really technical details which I'm sure I don't want to bore you with, but basically who can hold the land, who can hold property, where the investment comes from has changed nationally under the property directives, which has impacted on us, and all sorts of different things. It's not as a lack of commitment from the CCG in driving this forward. We are as much a victim of some of these issues as we are keen to move it forward.
Yeah, I think if there isn't going to movement forward, you should probably be explicit as, you to the wider public as what the problems are, so that we can all get those tackled.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. The digital side of things I welcome too. Quick shout out for Red Roofs. What a brilliant surgery. I think they're great. I think Councillor Longdon made a very, very valid point when he said people go on there, and if you want to reorder your prescription, I hear that everyone can do that fine. I hear that when you want to book an appointment, the routine ones really are, particularly if you want a specific doctor, and there seems to be at lots of, in fact all of them, there isn't one for next day or next week, it is weeks away, and you are kind of obliged to phone about 8 o'clock in the morning, which I don't do, but the only thing I'd say about the digital is there was a very bad experience with Babylon healthcare, hideously expensive. If it's going to be done by the PCNs that you look after, then great. If they're going to do that digital, online consultations themselves, if they're going to outsource it to up their capacity, then I would imagine that would break your budget, and I can't see you would want to go there, would be my only comment.
So we have gone through a procurement process that's off the framework within NHS England, the way it's delivered. So it is national
Providers,
yeah,
but not Pablo.
I believe that we have it. I don't know who. I genuinely don't know who the provider is, and I couldn't say at the moment because we haven't awarded the contract, but we're about to. So that's standing off because it.
Right. Okay, right. Thank you very much. We will move on to the next agenda item. Item 7, Community Safety Performance for Quarter 4 2018-19. So, who is going to present this? Abby?
Thank you very much. Apologies, Dave and I were at a course, so we were so what you've got in front of you is the quarter 4 performance information, and within that you've got a standard report that we produced at quarter 2 and quarter 4 stage, within which you've got kind of the key headline indicators that are picked up and have to stop the Community Safety Partnership for the years in Bedworth. Within that you've got indicators showing areas for the same period last year where either it's increased or decreased, and the detailed report is appended, so you've got all the information there. So I think hopefully you've had a chance to have a quick flick through that and look at the kind of fuller report that's appended. Happy to take any questions, and essentially Dave is here to take whatever questions, hopefully, whatever you can answer today, we will take them away, and then any pertinent points are then picked up by the partnership at the next meeting, which is in September.
Thank you. Councillor Golby?
I've reviewed the documentation that's come out. Now, for the last couple of sessions of the board that meets for putting the dome hall cameras around the place, I've been trying for quite a while to get a dome hawk in my patch, and I keep being told no, because it doesn't warrant it. Yet I'm listed here as areas to monitor. Now last week I got an email again telling me it didn't justify having a dome hawk. I can tell you where the hotspots are. In fact, I've been clear where the hotspots are, and I'm being told no because it doesn't warrant it. And yet when I look down the list on quarter 4 recorded offences, and I look at all the ones that have got dome hall cameras, actually there's quite a few of them that have got less problems listed than Arbery. So again, it's not a reasonable justification.
It really comes down to where exactly in Arbery you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because the reason I'm aware of your request via Julie Dellish, and I obviously I chair the tasking meeting where we decide on where the dome hawks go. It's decided as a group, and ultimately I'll get the last decision on it with the likes of Julie. When we look at where a dome hawk goes, we don't look at particularly the ward area, because those dome hawks are generally specifically used for an area which could be part of a street, part of a park. So I think I know the area that you're talking about.
Yeah.
What we are lacking is the calls.
People have stopped, they've given up. They've
Well-
literally given up calling, and it doesn't matter how many times I say phone it through. They're just sick of being held on the phone, or they're not getting responses. You know, we've had all the trouble down there with the travellers. We had all the trouble down Bermuda area. Where the bottom of that bridge, you've got the rat run to Hilltop, you've got the rat run through to Bermuda Park, and you look on the crime map, you've got crimes in Hilltop, you've got crimes in Bermuda Park. That is the epicentre. That is where they run through. Not necessarily where the crimes are exactly being committed, but it's the thoroughfare from people getting A to B. Those motorbikes are a big part of it. And they were reported last summer. We had I had a big push with the residents about reporting motorbikes, and they did, and it kind of worked. But now they're just not bothered because they're not seeing anything.
Well, firstly, we wouldn't use we wouldn't use a door camera for off-road motorbike issues, mainly because that's not what they're meant for, and also capturing data on those door cameras with a moving motorcycle, most of which don't bear their registration plates. The riders, a lot of them do have their helmets on, so we would struggle to identify those individuals. And also, I totally get where you're coming from in terms of the rat run, and that seems to be the location that people will utilise as part of their criminal journey, if you like. We have to use those Dormhole cameras specifically to either prevent a crime that's been building in that particular area, or to actually safeguard individuals, and that's the problem. I accept what you're saying about some people have given up calling, but equally I could argue the other side of the reason that some of those areas have got dome hub cameras is because people have been calling, have got through. And you are preaching to the choir. I mean, I think I must be one of your regular callers because I do phone a lot. I'll quite happily have another look at it for you. But we had to go on the last 3 months' data. Because generally speaking, we wouldn't go any further than that, to be honest with the councillor, because it doesn't have that impact anymore. Arguably, and we discussed this and we struggle with it sometimes, there are certain areas within Nuneaton and Bedworth, but mainly Nuneaton, where you could argue cameras have been there for a long, long time. And if we were to get, if we were to have the commission come to us and say, explain why camera number 5 has been there for 18 months, then we've got to be able to audit why. So it is a difficult one. We can move cameras around. Generally speaking, month to month we might have 1 or 2 cameras we can utilise, but generally speaking that's difficult because the majority of them are there and still required until we've actually resolved that problem.
So I'll ask you, coming back on that, I'll ask you 2 questions. Number 1 is these cameras that are practically stationary. And yet they are in high crime areas. So are they working if they're in high crime areas? And the other one is Arbery, with the big increase, what are you going to do about that? What can we do about it?
In terms of
policing in the area.
The violence you're talking about?
Well, I mean, it's a bit concerning. When you look on the crime map, the areas where some of them are occurring.
Well, Arbery, one of the reasons Arbery, my understanding is, from my memory, one of the spikes that Arbery had was vehicle crime. We actually got an offender in around that period who then admitted 20 plus crimes.
He did 16 in the village. He's out again now. That was part of the reasoning why I was trying to get a camera down there, because he's well known and his chances are he'll come back and do it again. I mean, you know as well as I do, he's a local regular.
I mean, you know, we did our best, we got him arrested, he got put in prison and he's out again. You know, that's the way it goes for us, unfortunately. We do try our best to offender management them with probation, but obviously
some of the residents would like to offender management him as well.
I absolutely understand. But as I said, we get a number of requests for the dome wall cameras, and we as much have to say no, we can't put it there for the reasons as we can say yes, we'll happily move that from A to B.
So I accept your point about the camera. Maybe it's not as effective down there as it could be, but given this increase,
Yeah.
can I have an offline, because not to take over this meeting with Aubrey, but can I have an offline talk with you about what exactly we can do to kind of reassure the residents with policing in the area, if that's okay?
Yeah, notwithstanding, I mean, that's from, is that from quarter 4 still? That is from quarter 4. It would be worth looking at, you know, the new quarter of this performance
I
year.
have,
so-
and it's higher.
Thank you. Carl,
Yeah, can I just clarify, Exhall South, does that include Kersley, I presume?
That's a good question. Because I just take it as Bedworth East and Bedworth
Yeah.
West, so yeah, I don't look at it like that because that's the performance dashboard. There's every chance there's a yes there because it is going that way, obviously.
I've never seen this breakdown before. It's normally, I normally just look at it as, you know, north and west, and then yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, believe it or not, internally for ward areas, I can't actually see ward area performance data at the moment. I can only look at Nuneaton and Bedworth.
Right.
Anything else?
No, thank you, Chair.
Councillor London?
Thank you. Page 16. It says violence against a persona and sexual offences have increased by 22%, which is not the best way to be travelling. Violence against a person with injury offences have increased by 23%.
Yeah.
Again, it's not clever. Violence against a person without injury offences have increased by 26%. Then it goes on to say rape offences have reduced by 26%.
Yeah.
So how do those figures tie up? Because if it's increased by, if sexual offences have increased by 22% and rape offences have reduced by 26%,
It's sexual offences.
another sexual offence has increased by 8%, it seems to be all over the place. I don't understand how you get to those figures.
Well, because there are other categories of sexual offences, not just rape. For example, sexual touching. So there may well be quite a lot of sexual touching offences. Clearly, rape is all about penetration.
Yes.
There are many other sex offences you can classify that are not. So that'll probably be the difference there. In terms of the rise in violence there, unfortunately, Nuneaton and Bedworth has seen a steady increase. We have looked at that analytically, but what it doesn't show us is where we've got any specific hotspot or specific areas we can tackle. So what we've come out with there was a mixture of offences that have come out of domestic abuse, offences that have come out of neighbour disputes, offences that have come out with groups of youths fighting with each other in park areas, and then of course the nighttime economy. So we couldn't really hang our hat, so to speak, on any given category that we could go and tackle. So, and notwithstanding as well, violence you'll find throughout the year is seasonal. You know, it'll usually increase summer months, especially on days like today, and then of course your Christmases and your New Year.
Can I just clarify something else? Well, it's the same thing, but other sexual offences, I understand what you say about rape, that is obviously a category.
That also might be, Councillor, to be fair, it might be that the reporting's reduced.
But the other ones, the other sexual offences have increased by 8%. Is that part of the 22%? Or is it separate?
I probably couldn't answer that one if I'm honest. The analysts come up with those figures. Unless I've got the detail, I wouldn't be able to answer that specifically.
Heaven save us from statisticians.
Anyone? Councillor Daffin?
Firstly, I just want to start on a positive note. It's nice to see reduction across recorded offences in heath reducing across the categories, which is quite nice. That's only really replicated in St Nicholas on that from quarter 4, so that's nice to see. My question is about deliberate small fires. I think it was kind of this time last year we had a few kind of high profile cases of deliberate small fires. We've got another increase for that quarter 4 this year, so I'm just kind of wondering about the strategy for that, so that we're not kind of having a repeat last year. We've got kind of lots of high profile cases of
Yeah, I mean, obviously we work closely with Fire. They actually sit in with our harm up in the Justice Centre. Becky Roberts, who's the arson reduction officer, she comes to the majority of our meetings. I think they have identified a couple of fire starters over the last few months that they're now working with and trying to educate these particular youths that they've caught. But yeah, I think especially last year they had a particularly dry year, which didn't help their cause. But I think it's fair to say that Becky is. They're under the impression they've got it under control the last few months.
And that's probably a question that we would reroute to Becky Roberts at Council. From what I can do is I'll make sure I'll tie with you to get that.
Thank you.
Any other councillor who hasn't spoken yet? Any other member? No. Then Claire, if we go back to you.
It was just something that I've remembered. A couple of weeks ago, my other half was out in the town centre, and he was saying that the kids outside McDonald's were just twice at a massive kick-off. Now that seems to be a centre for this sort of thing, with McDonald's having to employ their own security guards and what have you. Is there something that as a council we could look to put in place, like a dispersal order or some sort of legal, you know, like a PSPO or something like that, where gangs can't hang about? Would that assist the police in any way, or would it be beneficial?
not that I'm aware of. I mean, there are things such as those that you've mentioned, and there's community protection notices, etc. But really, it fluctuates with McDonald's, if I'm honest. We've been tackling that for the last number of years, and I probably don't know any town centre that doesn't have that issue with these fast food restaurants. We had the same issue with Wellington, with the KFC when that first opened. That's always been a bit of a flashpoint for us. So what we tend to do is, if we find and we get reports that there's large groups and there's violence linked to that, then I as an inspector can actually put in place a dispersal order for 48 hours. What we've got to be careful with that, and it's not to say that we wouldn't do it, because we've done it quite a few times, is that they're quite resource intensive. And what by that I mean, if my officers then approach these youths, give them all a little piece of paper to say, you will now leave this area and you will not return, and if they do, they have to be arrested. So if they were to go and come back and return en masse, and we've disappeared, we're off duty, etc., we've got a little bit of a problem potentially. So we have to be very careful how we plan those and how we police them. But I wasn't aware that there's been any recent issues around that.
Yeah, it was out a couple of weeks ago, so it was just ridiculous. Twice, 2 major kick-offs, just gangs of kids.
It does have its flashpoints, there's no two ways about it, and we've worked, I think it's fair to say, we've worked with the owner of that franchise quite a bit over the last few years, and it was the pressure from us that really led to them having security on the doors.
Guards, yeah. Comes to someone, don't it, when you've got security guards at a fast food restaurant.
Yeah, but it's something we can monitor, because I wasn't aware of that.
Just on that point, Chair, are you satisfied there's no drugs involved in this? Is that why they're kicking off?
It's hard to say. Generally speaking, the problems we've had with the youths there, it's not down to drugs, it's not down to alcohol even. It's just they're in groups and then they'll clash with another group. Some of it's even been planned. You know, we'll meet you at McDonald's. You know, we had it a few years ago where it was non-stop in the park. We eradicated that, but actually we moved it to McDonald's. So then we were able to tackle it at McDonald's. So it comes in spikes as well, because we'll find that a particular year group will have issues with each other from school, and it comes outside in the community. And then the next year they move on, and then we have a new group come, and it just seems to be an age thing. So it's that vicious cycle.
I've had that stuck in forward for the last 15, 16, 20 years, and it goes through those cycles.
Yeah.
1 year you get nothing, the next year they'll be kicking off, and then the next year you might get 2. I mean, we've had 2 quiet years so far, but now they're gathering, the storm clouds are gathering.
Yeah, I lived in Stock before, so I know what you mean.
Any other member? No? A couple of quick things, really, you, Abu and Wendy. Before this swap to being called the external, it was agreed at its predecessor that these would be in colour, the charts that came over from NABSCOP. The other thing we've talked about in the past is there needed to be a couple more of the NABSCOP ones in here. I think there was 2 more pages that, it's not all of the NABSCOP ones because that's quite a lot, but there was 2 more, and if we can have a look at those, then maybe we can identify the right ones to add in, but they do need to be in colour. The other thing, and members tell me if this makes sense to you, I think when we work out the work programme or when officers sort out the schedule, we need to have the meeting that looks at this much closer to the NABSCOP meeting, because the NABSCOP data's quite old by the time they look at it, and now, you know, we're really concerned with looking back at what was happening in October last year, and it's July this year. It's a little bit late, you know, to be drawing conclusions, so that, you know, if I appreciate we can't really have it before NABSCOP, but you know, as close to those 2 meetings as better, because then it's fresh in your mind as well, Dave, because you've just covered it, and other officers that attend, and so we're looking at it from a different perspective, a higher level perspective than the NABSCOP guys, and we don't want to know about the details much, but it would be better if it was fresher. So is that something that can be worked on when they have those 2 things?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that we're looking at just with obviously Rachel, who is involved before, is we're just looking at the timelines and timescales around NABSCOP as well, and the frequency around that, because there's some variation in that. So we can kind of work those timescales, and I'll leave it.
Yeah, I mean, ideally the same kind of week, or you know, no more than that. Councillor Brown.
Chair, based on what you've just said, can we formally propose a committee?
Yeah, I was going to say, when should we put forward a motion to do both of those things?
It's to say that we must review it within a specific time of the NABSCOP meeting. Well, suggest a couple of months or
we want it closer than that, because it's quite old when it goes to NABSCOP. So if we just leave it at that, you know, it will be, the colour ones will be put in with some additional NABSCOP charts as appropriate, and that officers will make sure that the meeting, the OSP meeting that looks at NABSCOP data, will be as close to the NABSCOP meeting data as possible.
But Chair, can I ask how that's going to fall in with the 3-monthly process? If you know, if the figures aren't coming in just at the right time for an overview and scrutiny meeting?
I think from what Abby was saying, they're resetting the dates of the NABSCOP meeting, so as they're being done as close as possible, I think is all we can ask, rather than specifying a set period of time. So I'm moving that. Does somebody want to second that?
I'll second.
Seconded by Claire. All in favour? Anyone against?
Agreed.
Anyone against? No. So yeah, if we can minute that, those 2 changes, that'd be great. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Alex. Right, in that case, we will move on from item 7 to item 8. Thank you very much for attending, John. Appreciate it. So this is something that you ought to present, I think, isn't it, Wendy?
Yes, this is an update or a revision of the Overview of Scrutiny Guide, which actually was adopted by Council back on the 26th of April 2017. So what we're bringing to the panel tonight is a revised and updated version that takes into account the changes in 2018 with regards to scrutiny, and also management changes, and then changes from this year's annual council. So basically it's just an update, an amendment to take on board changes. The document has been to the internal overview and scrutiny panel. There were some amendments, but basically those amendments were to the glossary to take out the items that were no longer relevant. But other than that, they've approved the document put forward at the council.
Okay. Just so that we all know who's instigated this, is this just something that's done on an annual basis?
This was first generated, I think, obviously it's before my time, but by the scrutiny officer and Phil Richardson as a guide taken out of the constitution, been taken out of the constitution.
And it's looking like annual from
Yes.
Okay. So I understand who's done it and why he's done it. I've done the marked up version there for us all to see. To be honest, there was nothing meaningful in there, which kind of is a bit of a lost opportunity as far as I'm concerned. But Councillor Evans, you had a point that you wanted to make.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to make a recommendation to the committee,
right.
With your permission.
Yeah.
I'd like to recommend to the committee that we recommend to full council that this guide be adopted by council with an additional amendment. The amendment is in relation to the council's calling policy on page 7 of the guide, so page 29 of the report, and I would like to move an amendment that we remove the number 5 on paragraph 3 and replace with the number 10. So the it now reads period of 10 clear working days. I personally believe that the calling process needs to be longer for...
Being honest with you, I thought it was longer than that, a lot longer. Is that 5 days right?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. What page are we looking at?
29.
29. As I say, this has been lifted from the Constitution. So we can go back and have a look at the Constitution.
It would have to go to the Constitution.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Councillor Evans. I don't think 5 days is long enough. I think, unless anyone knows differently, I thought, and it sounds like Councillor Tandy thought it was longer than 5 days anyway. What were you proposing it should be extended to, sorry?
I was proposing that we amend it to 10 clear working days.
So that's a 2 weeks then.
And obviously if that amendment was to pass, the second recommendation is that council amends the constitution as appropriate.
Fine, have you got that, Wendy?
I've got all of that.
It can only be done by moving the Constitution, can't it? We can't agree it here.
No,
No,
this is just a recommendation.
Council could accept our
We can
recommendation.
agree it, but we can't make it happen.
No, we
quite.
can just recommend it.
So on that basis, you've proposed that. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Brown and Councillor Sargent?
Just to clarify, Chair, the motion states recommend to council.
Yeah, recommend to council acceptance of the revised overview and scrutiny guide with the following amendment, that in paragraph 3 of page 29, the number 5 is changed to 10
It
working
isn't just
days.
a recommendation to council, though, it's a change to the Constitution,
Yeah.
which can only be done once a year.
And with the following phrase that says,
And recommend council to amend the constitution as appropriate.
Yeah, but you can only amend the Constitution at your annual council
Chair,
meeting.
that's what I'm moving.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's fine.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
So that's been proposed and seconded. All those in favour? Anyone against? No? All good. I didn't have any other points on that. Did anyone else have any other points on the revisions? They looked just like updated to me. But in that case, we will move on. Forward plan, page 80. This is just for information only. This is just the stuff that's coming to Cabinet, but if any member wishes to comment and have it put in the minutes, so it's...
Chair,
Councillor.
if I may, I would like to raise a concern that at the bottom of page 88 there's a feasibility study into leisure provision options for the borough.
Yeah.
That is now being pushed back on at least 5 occasions, and really I just wondered if the officer knew why.
That's the work programme, that's the forward plan. We're looking at the forward plan.
Oh, are we? So
Sorry,
on page 81, forward plan.
it's just,
Is it on the forward plan?
Yeah.
it says number 9, forward plan, and
Yeah.
then number 10, draft work programme. So I think they're misnumbered. Yeah, this is the forward plan, so we're looking
Yeah.
at the forward plan,
81.
which is item 9, agenda item 9, forward plan.
Yeah, that one.
81. Leisure provision options.
Oh, yeah.
This continues to be pushed back on every single new forward plan gets released every month, and I just wondered if the officer knew why that is, because it's obviously it's an important subject. Or at least could we get an officer, possibly Director Richardson, to report to the next OSP why it was being pushed back?
Do you want to go further? Do you want us to request that it doesn't get pushed back any further?
Yeah, I would actually, yeah.
Does that seem to make sense?
OSP will be after that, after September 2019, will it not?
Yes.
So that's been recommended that you're proposing that Director Richardson provides, and I'm sure it can just be emailed round to us when we can get that, the reason why it's been pushed back again, and that you're proposing that we request that it doesn't get pushed back again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm happy to second that, so all those in favour? Anyone against? We good with that? We good? Yeah. So, anyone else want to speak on item 9? It is done then. If we can move on to item 10. Which is the work programme. Any member? As I say, I'm not normally on this OSP, so you guys will know better than I if there's stuff on there that you don't think should be or if it's missing. No, are we just noting that then? We're not required to do anything else on that?
No, I mean, the only thing I would say on that, there are 2 working groups that are showing at the bottom there. The gambling working group, which was carried over, obviously now, and I've spoken to the chair about this, we will be looking for new members to go onto that group, given the change with the portfolio holder and Councillor Watkins. So that will carry on, but we're just looking at that at the moment. And also the changing places, toilet facilities, we will be going out to find volunteers to sit on that working group.
Do you want volunteers now for both of those, or are you just going to email?
I can take volunteers, I can
I will do the gambling one, happily.
Surely they have to go out to all members.
Yeah, I mean, you are going to email them
Has
now,
to
but
go out to all members.
if you're looking for immediate volunteers, there's 2. Yeah, if you're going to email everyone, that's great.
It's a bit unfair just for members here to have the option to do it without
No.
going out to the wider members.
No. Quite right, Councillor Tandy. It will get emailed out to everyone. It's just, save us delaying as we're all here. If anyone wants to put earlier. So that's forward plan completed. And draft work programme. So that just leaves any other items. Any other business, any other points members wish to raise? In that case, thank you all for your attendance. Safe journey home. I'll call the meeting to a close.